Back episode 7. This time it's going to take on a little bit of a different tone because we are starting afresh, and this time we are going to talk about Fidel Castro. I'm going to do the episodes in the same exact order for Castro as I did for Hitler. So we're going to focus on the emergence of authoritarian states at first, specifically talking about the conditions in which authoritarian states emerged, economic factors, social division, impact of war, weakness of political system. Let's get into it. Impact of war, not a lot here. Not directly a lot here, right? To really talk about the impact of war, you have to go all the way back to 1901, 1898, 1900, 1901. That's the Spanish-American War, and America essentially ridding Cuba of its Spanish imperialist overlord, if you will, and taking over that role with the signing of the Platt Amendment in 1901. The Platt Amendment allows the United States to intervene in Cuba economically, militarily, politically, really however it wants to enforce Cuban independence, right? So this is the card America's going to pull to do whatever it wants in Cuba. So impact of war, it's there, right? All of this happens because of the Platt Amendment, but there's not a real direct correlation between war and Castro. Social division, this one's a little bit bigger. This one's a little bit more prominent, a lot more meat on this bone, right? Batista's regime is going to be very anti-Cuban, right? There's a tremendous wealth gap in Cuba between the haves and the have-nots. The pro-U.S. part of society and the non-U.S. part of society, the one Spanish part of society, and the indigenous Cuban part of society, right? We're going to get into that a little bit more in a second, right? Batista's policies are going to help out the wealthy landowning class and do absolutely nothing for everybody else. So his policies are going to make the wealth gap and some of these social issues even worse than they already were. Oriente province is going to be a prime example of this, as Oriente is not really where the Spanish ventured to. It's not really where westernization and industrialization is going to happen. So that's where all like the have-nots are going to reside, and the haves are going to settle on the western side of Cuba. Again, Cuba, along with a lot of other Latin American countries or South American countries or Caribbean countries, however you want to talk about it, their social structure and social division is very indicative of race. That if you were an indigenous person or if you were an Afro whatever, right? So if you were an African person that came over in the transatlantic slave trade and settled in that period, you are now like Afro-Cuban, right? Afro whatever. You're on the bottom rungs of society, where the whiter your blood was, the higher up in society you were, because you were of the colonial class once upon a time. That's going to still be a thing in Cuba all throughout Batista's regime. Again, he's going to target those people and building up the wealthy class with his policies and not really do anything for the indigenous Cuban population. Economic factors. Here's another really big one. It's sugar, right? We talked about this at length in class. We talked about a banana republic. America is going to, through the Platt Amendment, because they're going to make Cuba a one-crop state. That crop is sugar. Really, the only state that Cuba did business with in terms of selling its sugar was the United States, right? Sugar is the main source of Cuban employment, especially when we talk about Cubans and Afro-Cubans, right? That class of society that's kind of overlooked. The Great Depression is going to hit the United States, and because of the Smoot-Hawley tariff, a lot of these Cuban exports are not going to be sold in the United States anymore. So the Cuban economy is going to completely bottom out, and the economic dependence on the United States is going to be loud and clear to the Cuban population. This dependency on the United States and the obviousness of that dependency is going to lead to a lot of anti-Batista opposition starting to rise up. The political system. Let me move myself up here so you can see it all. Weakness in the political system. It's a really weak political system, right? This is something that I would definitely want to incorporate into whatever essay I'm writing to talk about how flimsy the situation was. So I kind of outlined Batista for you, right? Batista's president from 40 to 44. Prior to president, he's going to be the leader of the Cuban military. In 52, he comes back and he is going to lead a coup against the elected government to take over as another stint. This time as a full-fledged military dictator, and he has no elections in that entire 7-year span, 8-year span that he rules Cuba as a military dictator. He's going to suspend the constitutions that came before his rule in 1952 that did have progressive reforms that did help Cuban and Afro-Cuban populations. That's not going to be a thing anymore. His policies in this stint as military dictator are even going to be more pro-US than they were when he was president, and they're going to favor the wealthy class even more than they had, again, when he was president. Again, that stint as military dictator is going to be one of a lot of corruption. The mafia is going to be intimately involved in a lot of Cuban politics. They're going to launder money. They're going to have organized crime start to influence Cuban politics. So it's really bad in that last part of the Batista regime. As things got worse, Batista's oppression of opposition is going to get worse as well. Civil liberties are going to be suppressed. Afro-Cubans and Cubans are going to be completely robbed of pretty much every freedom and civil liberty that they have, right? So as Batista's regime gets more and more totalitarian, right? As things get worse, he takes more away. As he takes more away, he gets more totalitarian. As he gets more totalitarian, opposition is going to get louder and louder. That is it for this first episode on Castro. That is a wrap on episode 7. We're going to come back to talk about this bullet point right here in episode 8. Again, hope these are helping.